Good morning. My name is Mimi Vu, and I'm a partner at Raise Partners, which is an ESG consulting practice here in Vietnam. And I have my lovely panelists with me here today, Binh and Huong. If you want to give a quick introduction of yourselves.
My name is Binh. I'm one of the co-founders of Ascend Vietnam Ventures. We're a seed stage fund deploying capital here. We've been deploying capital in Vietnam since 2015. We have a team of 10 in Ho Chi Minh City.
Hi everyone, my name is Huong. I am with Monster Ventures as their venture partner based in Ho Chi Minh City. We are a regional fund, so we do have team members all across Southeast Asia, including some other countries. And as a Vietnamese, born and raised locally, I actually have spent about 12 years in the US working, doing my graduate school program there and then working in the US, and have recently returned about 3 years ago to Vietnam.
So today's panel is, I think, one of the key panels. We just heard the startup panel. We've heard about CEOs and companies, but now we're talking about the money, the funding, because you can have all the great ideas you want, but if you don't have the investment, they just remain ideas, right? So is Vietnam's funding future as rosy as it looks? Before we delve into that, I wanted to first talk about the angle of why we're actually here today, because this is the Overseas Vietnamese Summit, is that as investors, so Binh, you're a VQ investor, and then Huong, you're not quite VQ, but you're overseas, you spend enough time overseas, and then you're back here. We heard from Swan from Phonos that now as she's at the stage of her startup where she doesn't say yes to every investor that wants to invest. She takes her time, and there are a lot of other funds like that too. And she, to assess, is this the right investor for me? So for both of you, as VQ or overseas investors, I wanted to know, from your vantage point, what are the advantages or differences between being a VQ or overseas or ethnic Vietnamese investor versus a completely foreign investor? What are the advantages, challenges, differences that you bring to the table when trying to invest in startups like Phonos, who have a suite of investors who want to invest in them?
Disadvantage is language. I was born in District 1, but I left when I was 1. So over the last 4 years of living here, my Vietnamese has improved. But it's really important that you have a team that can speak Vietnamese, but more importantly, connect culturally through language in an interpersonal way to build trust with the founders that you're looking to invest in. So that's a big disadvantage for me. Mm-hmm. My advantage is that I have a global perspective of what might be what a high-performing or globally competitive team might look like versus a local investor who maybe hasn't seen that.
But what about, I just want to touch on, what about not you versus a local investor, but you versus a foreign investor? So you're both foreign, you're coming in. So the advantage or disadvantage for you being VQ versus a foreign investor, right?
Maybe I'm making a guess here. It's a disadvantage being a VQ.
Really?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because there has been over a period of time a lot of VQs who come here misrepresenting themselves, and maybe the local Vietnamese believing that there's someone over here who's VQ who's saying
sketchy.
that they're saying they're very successful overseas, and in reality they're not.
Interesting.
And so perhaps there's an erosion of trust there. And so being a VK actually is a slight disadvantage.
So you sense that the startups maybe trust like a Western face more than a...
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, if all things equal, I mean, there's an affinity of being Vietnamese. So yes, they're going to try to speak Vietnamese with you. And if you can show respect and start with Vietnamese, that's going to help bridge that communication. Okay. But I think over time, that all erodes, right? And hopefully information becomes very symmetrical. You know who this person is, that they follow through, they actually invest, and they help you.
Okay.
Well, it's fascinating. And Binh, thank you so much for that, bringing that topic of trust, and it's actually the first time I've heard someone like him speaking for the record on stage. So appreciate that candid comment. So quick show of hands, how many of you here are overseas Vietnamese, in other words, VietQ, coming back and thinking about, starting up here or relocating here? Show of hands, how many of you? Okay, well, a substantial amount. I actually saw a familiar face all the way at the back, and she, I know, is living in Hong Kong, all the way from the US, and she happens to pop in, so one of those. Now, show of hands, the local Vietnamese who've gone abroad to study and return. Okay, you know what? I actually think it's a good 50-50, right? And all of you are essentially in the bucket of overseas Vietnamese, as we've spoken about. I myself, I don't know if I would call myself VK or not VK, because I'm both, right? I am local. I was born and raised here in a city that was sort of crumbling post-war in the early 80s, gone through the hyperinflation stage. I was very little to remember the coins and all that. And then in the 90s, we saw Clinton presidency that really opened up Vietnam. In the 2000s, Vietnam joined WTO. And since then, it has been on the rise, as you all have seen. And there are actually many VietQs who have, I don't know if I 100% agree to what Binh just talked about in terms of erosion of trust, because it's like, I think we're humans, right? You have your interactions with certain sets of people, and my interactions with the VietQs that I have come to know since the 2000s when they came back here and worked, I was with Unilever at the time, was a pleasant experience, right? So I think it varies. Now, I think the one common thing amongst the two personas we have seen here in this room today would be you're interested in entrepreneurship. You're interested in doing business in Vietnam to a certain extent, and that's why you're here, connecting to, in this homecoming event. From that perspective, many of you have had exposure, experiences globally, having lived in certain countries abroad or having worked or studied abroad. So I'm guessing you're not the average local Vietnamese that would never think about raising money from global investors. Is that correct? At some point when you grow globally, you would have to interface, interacted, pitched, worked with global investors. And were some of them sitting here on stage today? One of the advantages, like Binh said, in his words is disadvantages, but I would see that as advantages, is speaking English to begin with. I mean, this is still a big industry in Vietnam today. The truth is, you can speak Vietnamese, but only to that certain extent, right? Behind all of that interpersonal connections at the beginning, when investors like us dig deeper, and at Monks Hill, we sort of brand ourselves as first principles investors. What does that mean? We break your hypothesis down into variables that we have to underwrite. And so it goes back into beyond that interpersonal connection, which could be conducted in Vietnamese, it would all have to be in global business terms, which is essentially in English or financials or whatever that you have to underwrite the deal. So from that perspective, I do think that English is an advantage that we all need to pursue at some point. Now that said, within your team, if you do have complementary team members, of course that would be to your best advantage, right? Where you can have, you can interface and go in between both cultures. And so from my personal experience, having lived and seen through both cultures, I think Marina on stage earlier was talking about the culture shock she had when she first got back here and saw people all taking a siesta nap during the day. It sounds funny when we talk about it, but it is true that we just have a lot of different cultural nuances that would be conducted into business. So having both on your team would definitely position your team to really understand the local nuances, competitive advantages, while thriving to build a big global business.
Do either of you ever find yourselves flipping back and forth between your Vietnamese and your VietQ or overseas Vietnamese identity? So for me, for example, when I'm at, Chợ Binh Thanh and I'm bargaining, I am Vietnamese. And you give me the Vietnamese price, right? So, but
You
other
guys
times-
remember her.
But other times I'm like, oh no, I'm American, so so I get treated differently. Do you ever do that in the investment world too? Is that something that you find as an advantage to be able to embody different facets of your identity?
I don't flip. I'm 50 years old. I know where I
The
sit.
skin is fantastic.
And who I am. So for me, I just laid it out. I'm here to help Vietnamese-based companies be global champions, be sector-leading companies, and completely change the brand of what it means to be a Vietnamese company. All right, so I think it's coming, and so that's my bridge for entrepreneurs, whether you're Vietnamese or not, working here. And so I want to be very authentic. I want to be very transparent. I want to build a relationship with you. If it has to go through English or Vietnamese, we have team members that can do that, but that's what we want. We want to build very long-term relationships and completely change the way Vietnamese businesses are viewed.
Yeah, so a little bit more similar to Mimi, I would say, because Vietnamese is still my first language up until the 20s when I went to the US,
Yeah.
right? So yes, I do find myself, when I speak Vietnamese, many of you who have studied languages know when you switch into a different language, your mind kind of switches context. So yes, but then because we are a regional fund, and our goal, similar to Anh Binh's fund goals, we're here to champion Vietnamese entrepreneurs to build large, global businesses, right? That can scale beyond just Vietnam. And there's a reason to that. I mean, you've seen Vietnam has been on the rise, attracting lots of global attention, which also means that it comes with pressure and, money comes with responsibility. Vietnam alone is that enough as a business, as big as a business for a VC outside returns and expectations? And I guess where I sit is, having lived and worked in both, the US and Vietnam, having seen, for me, the kind of founders and the kind of businesses that attract me the most are folks who think big, who want to build, global ambitions, but at the same time, very rooted and understand how to leverage deeply connected ecosystem strengths such that they can bring that out and play on the global arbitrage, which I think, is beautiful, right? And I've come across deals like that. One example I can tell you is that, there's an ed tech, right? And in Vietnam, you meet so many people interested in education and solving for, ed tech plays. But then, at the same time, the market is just Vietnam. It's not big enough, right? It's not big enough in terms of a VC outsized returns and expectations. So then, in this case, the founder has been, sitting on it back and forth for quite a long time. And then eventually, with the exposure, global exposure that she's gained over time, she started realizing, and, with the mentorship, and we talked a lot about it, she started realizing healthcare. And this is a global issue, right? Shortage of, on the supply side, nursing staff, healthcare service providers, and whatnot. And so combining the supply from Southeast Asia, where you have relatively young workforce, and the acute demand of shortage in, countries with aging demographics, that's where the beauty comes in, right? So it clicks. So I think examples like that, I would expect to see more and more, especially from people like you guys in the room who have seen and lived in both worlds.
So that leads to the next question, which is, from the investor point of view, if you're looking at companies or startups, and we have an audience here that's filled with VQ, who are here and thinking about moving here and doing startups, or Vietnamese who've gone overseas to work and live and now have returned to do the same. What is the added benefit or value of investing in companies founded by people like that versus local? Or is it harder? Because we heard some of the harder ones, some of the challenges before in the previous panels. But what would you see are the value adds or the benefits?
The big advantage for Vietnam is software engineers. That's the basis. As ecosystems with large pools of software engineers, they go through a software renaissance. that includes entrepreneurship and capital, the ecosystem's mature and there's a rate of maturity that becomes very steep. So Vietnam has had this outsourcing software industry since the late 90s. And so that's the core advantage. And so if you are able to lead and develop software engineering teams, that Vietnamese language is an advantage. That said, if you look at companies like VNPay, 300 engineers, VP of engineering, doesn't speak a lick of Vietnamese. There's not a requirement to succeed by speaking the language here. Yeah. Right? Vietnam, there's many examples of market-leading companies led by folks who don't speak Vietnamese. So it's not an ethnic thing. What Vietnam has is 100 million people, but it doesn't have the billion people population of China to really start being protectionist, where only Vietnamese people win. Yep. In order for Vietnam to continue that 7, 8, 9% GDP growth, it really has to make it very accessible to foreigners, for international folks to come in, see it as a growth market, and that knowledge transfer over time helps the country, and the people become very, very competitive on a global international level. And so I don't think it as VQ or foreign or Vietnamese. I just think, hey, this is globally competitive. Yep. Vietnam over time is going to get there, especially if the market's very accessible. Yep. And doesn't implement a lot of protectionist policies.
So for you as well, the trend for investing you see in the future is in software engineering?
Well, collectively in the region, I mean, the future of all economies is tech. Tech transforms societies. And if you look at the region is Southeast Asia. It's the newest emerging Asia. Every emerging Asia of the past has generated so much value. Here, this emerging Asia, the growth of 650 million people moving from low income to middle income, and the millions and millions of small businesses are very similar in needs and problems that have yet to be solved. And so technology adoption across the entire region is very, very early, but inevitable. Yeah. And so that core, that technology that's going to transform a lot of the industries and sectors and solve a lot of problems, a lot of that's going to be powered by Vietnamese engineers and hopefully led by Vietnamese entrepreneurs as well. And part of the function for that is that Vietnam needs to remain open and accessible and diverse. And so it's the first emerging Asia where it's not just, that growth's not just for Southeast Asians. It's for East Asians, it's for Westerners, and that diversity, that intersection is creating very different types of growth and maturity and opportunities that I find very exciting, and that anyone who's looking at Southeast Asia, whether you're overseas Vietnamese or you're European or whatever, are also finding very exciting. And so that's what I see as the opportunity, and Vietnam plays a very critical role within that regional opportunity.
So we have tech, we have healthcare as two of the key areas. A couple more ideas, and then we have time, I think, for one question. Huong, very quickly, what other sectors do you find are the trends for investing?
Yeah, for sure. Have you guys read the latest McKinsey report on Vietnam being one of the top 10 largest consumer markets in the world by 2030? So 6 years from now, we'll become top 10. What does that mean? It's a huge consumer market, right? And so the emerging consumer is what I'm interested in. And of course, the consumer's needs range from food, agriculture, healthcare, financial services, and whatnot. That's one. The second one I'm definitely bullish on is we've heard a lot and spoken a lot and seen a lot, the AI trend. But in more specific, for me, what does it represent? It represents a wave of higher productivity, reduced costs, and all that. I think there would be two main themes within that. One, it would be AI co-pilot, right? AI plus X, whatever that might be, as long as it helps you increase efficiency. Then it would disrupt all these different other industries we've talked about, industrial, manufacturing, whatnot. The second theme is, as much as we invest into generative AI, I think there is also a call for responsible AI, which is important. The rise of generative AI, you guys have seen, especially living in Vietnam. Even I was cheated and, scammers and all that, right? And the other day we received a message on Facebook. One of our coworkers received a ping from Peng, our founding partner, to go buy some apples or whatever, and transfer some money. So with that, the rise of cybersecurity threats. Okay. So I think that's important to be underlined. And then last but not least for me, as I come from the background of underrepresented tech female founder, having done the rodeo in Silicon Valley, I have that sort of connection to look out for underrepresented founders.
Okay.
And so with that, to be very honest, femtech, female-led startups, female technologies, family tech, all of that, it sounds like it's sort of an ESG, sort of a thing that people put it in that bucket, but actually if you've seen the latest research by World Economic Forum and McKinsey Health Institute, the gaps in women's health represent a $1 trillion opportunity in the next 10 years. I'll give you an example. Menopause. There's no technology serving that. And Maven Clinic in the US came out with a solution. It's the biggest growth driver. That's an example.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have time for one or two questions. Yes, I don't know who has the mic down there. Anyone for questions? Yes? Could you introduce yourself very quickly, please? And
Hi, my name is Lauren, and I came back from the U.S. 2 days ago, partially to attend this conference. And thank you for being panelists. I have a question about the application process. For example, Y Combinator has an online application where startups can apply for funding, and then you go through rounds of interviews. So do your venture capitalist firms have something similar, or how does an entrepreneur request or apply for funding? Is it, okay, I show you my pitch deck, and then I call, I email to make an appointment? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, we try to make ourselves really available, even when you're not fundraising. If you have questions about venture capital, if you want to ideate on whether or not this is a VC scale business, that's 99.9% of the time where we say no, or there's just so much deal flow. It's because we don't see a potential NASDAQ IPO listing, right? So there's so many amazing businesses out there, a lot of successful, driven entrepreneurs with great ideas, solving real problems, generating real revenue, that we think, okay, maybe $15, $20 million a year in revenue, anyone would be so proud of themselves in creating a business like that. But we can't make our return unless it's hundreds of millions of dollars and a listing in the US market. And so the big challenge for us is working with a lot of entrepreneurs and being somewhat of an ecosystem builder and educating on what that capital path might be. And so, yes, please reach out. Our website is avv.co. There's a form. You can contact us, send us anything.
Okay. Okay, I get housing. That's it. Thank you so much. I want to thank Binh and Huong, our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
They're here, so you can talk to them afterwards if you have more questions. Thank you.